Victoria Ashford often believed happiness announced itself quietly. Not with trumpets. Not with grand declarations. Not with dazzling crowns or royal ceremonies. It arrived in the small moments. In the warmth of her husband's hand resting against hers beneath a dinner table crowded with nobles. In the way Duke Alexander Ashford always slowed his stride whenever she walked beside him. In the softness that appeared in his dark eyes whenever he looked at her, a softness few people in the kingdom had ever witnessed. On the evening that changed everything, Victoria stood before the mirror inside her private chambers while a maid carefully fastened the final pearl into her pale rose gown. The silk flowed gracefully over her swollen belly. 7 months. The thought still filled her with wonder. Her physician knew a secret no one else did. She was not carrying one child. She was carrying 2. Twins. Every night she placed both hands upon her stomach and imagined tiny futures unfolding within her. 2 laughing children racing through palace gardens. 2 small faces waiting at windows whenever Alexander returned home. The dreams felt so real she could almost hear them. A gentle knock sounded at the door. Alexander entered. For a moment the future seemed to stand before her. Tall, handsome, powerful. Yet when he looked at her, none of those things mattered. His expression softened instantly. You should be resting. Victoria smiled. And miss the royal ball? I would gladly survive that sacrifice. She laughed. The sound eased something in him. Crossing the room, he knelt before her and pressed a kiss against her stomach. The gesture made her heart ache with affection. Our children already outrank me, he said. They certainly do. His smile appeared briefly before disappearing again. Victoria noticed the change immediately. Recently, shadows seemed to follow him everywhere. Late meetings. Private conversations. Letters burned before anyone could read them. Whenever she asked questions, he reassured her everything was fine. But she could feel worry beneath the surface. Tonight the concern looked deeper than ever. Alexander? He looked up. What troubles you? For several seconds he remained silent. Then he rose and gently touched her cheek. Nothing that matters more than you. The answer sounded practiced. Not false. Simply incomplete. Before she could press further, he offered his arm. The kingdom is waiting, Duchess. Together they descended into the brilliance of Ashford Palace. Crystal chandeliers illuminated endless marble halls. Musicians filled the air with elegant waltzes. Gold and silver shimmered beneath candlelight. Hundreds of nobles had gathered for the royal celebration. Among them stood Lady Celeste Ravenshire. Victoria's smile faded slightly. Celeste possessed extraordinary beauty and extraordinary ambition. Years before Alexander had briefly courted her. The relationship ended long before his marriage. Yet Celeste never seemed willing to let the past remain buried. Tonight she wore deep violet silk and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. When Alexander and Victoria entered the ballroom, Celeste's eyes settled upon Victoria's stomach. A strange satisfaction flickered across her face. It vanished almost instantly. Most people never noticed. Victoria did. The evening unfolded with music, dancing, and conversation. Yet beneath the elegance something felt wrong. Groups of nobles fell silent whenever Alexander approached. Several influential lords exchanged secret glances. The atmosphere carried tension hidden beneath polished manners. Near midnight Alexander was summoned by Lord Blackwood, one of the kingdom's most influential politicians. Victoria watched him disappear into a gathering of nobles. Celeste drifted nearby moments later. "My dear Duchess," she said sweetly. Victoria forced a polite smile. "Lady Celeste, you look tired." "I am perfectly well." "Of course." The word sounded harmless. The tone did not. A strange unease settled inside Victoria. Without explanation she found herself moving toward a side corridor overlooking the ballroom. She paused beside an open doorway partly concealed by decorative curtains. From there she could see the gathering surrounding Alexander. Dozens of nobles stood listening. Lord Blackwood laughed. Another noble raised a glass. Someone mentioned Alexander's marriage. Victoria smiled instinctively. Then Celeste stepped into the circle. Everything seemed to slow. The musicians continued playing. Candles continued burning. Yet every instinct warned Victoria something terrible was approaching. Celeste lifted her glass. "Tell us honestly, Your Grace." Several nobles chuckled. "What? Do you ever regret marrying the Duchess?" Silence followed. Victoria's heart stopped. Alexander's jaw tightened. For a brief second his eyes scanned the crowd. He looked trapped, cornered. Then, to Victoria's disbelief, he laughed. Not warmly. Not kindly. Bitterly. Cruelly. The sound shattered something inside her. I regret marrying her. The word struck harder than any blade. Laughter erupted around him. Glasses lifted. Several nobles smirked. Celeste's smile widened triumphantly. Victoria could barely breathe. The world tilted. Her knees weakened. Every beautiful memory suddenly felt fragile. Every promise suddenly uncertain. She never heard Alexander continue speaking. Never heard the hesitation in his voice. Never heard the warning hidden beneath his performance. Because pain had already drowned everything else. Tears blurred her vision. Without making a sound, Victoria stepped backward from the doorway. Far away, thunder rolled across the night sky. The first drops of rain struck the palace windows. One hand rested protectively over her stomach. Over the twins Alexander did not yet know existed. And before dawn arrived, the Duchess who loved him more than life itself would disappear into the storm without a single goodbye. Victoria did not cry when she left Ashford Palace. The tears had already frozen somewhere deep inside her heart. Rain lashed against the carriage windows as horses struggled through the darkness beyond the capital. Lightning tore silver scars across the clouds, illuminating forests and winding roads for brief, terrifying moments before plunging everything back into blackness. Wrapped in a cloak, Victoria sat alone with one trembling hand resting over her swollen stomach. The words would not stop echoing. I regret marrying her. Again. 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 Each repetition felt sharper than the last. She remembered Alexander kneeling before her mirror only hours earlier. Remembered his kiss upon her belly. Remembered the tenderness in his eyes. Now every memory felt like a cruel illusion. Perhaps she had imagined everything. Perhaps she had loved a man who never truly existed. The thought hurt more than the storm. Another violent contraction of pain swept through her chest. Not physical pain. The agony of betrayal. She closed her eyes and pressed both hands protectively over the children growing within her. You still have me, she whispered shakily. The twins shifted gently. For the first time since leaving the palace, Victoria felt a reason to keep moving forward. She was no longer merely a wife. She was a mother. And mothers survived things that would destroy anyone else. Hours later the storm worsened. The narrow road beside the river became dangerously slick. The frightened horses struggled against wind and mud. Then lightning exploded directly overhead. The animals panicked. The carriage lurched violently. Victoria grabbed the seat. A wheel struck hidden stone. Wood cracked. Everything happened at once. The carriage tilted. The horses screamed. Glass shattered. Then the world disappeared. Back at Ashford Palace, Alexander entered their chambers shortly before dawn. His heart immediately sank. The room felt wrong. Silent. Empty. Cold. Victoria's favorite shawl was gone. Several drawers stood open. A traveling bag had vanished. For one terrible second he simply stared. Then fear seized him. Victoria? No answer. He crossed the room quickly. Victoria? Nothing. The silence became unbearable. Servants rushed into the hallway as Alexander stormed through the palace. Within minutes the entire household was awake. Guards searched every corridor. Stables were inspected. Carriages counted. Witnesses questioned. A maid eventually admitted seeing the Duchess leave during the storm. Alexander felt the blood drain from his face. The word barely seemed possible. Victoria never left without telling him. Never. Then understanding struck. The ballroom. The conversation. The look on Celeste's face afterward. Horror tightened around his chest. No. The realization came too late. Victoria had heard him. Search parties rode out before sunrise. Throughout the following days, horsemen combed forests, villages, rivers, and mountain roads. Alexander joined them personally. Sleep became meaningless. Food became irrelevant. Every hour without news deepened his desperation. The king himself demanded updates. Entire regions were searched. Still nothing. Then on the seventh day a messenger arrived. Alexander recognized disaster before the man even spoke. Mud covered the rider's uniform. Rain streaked his face. The silence in the room felt fatal. We found the carriage, Your Grace. Alexander's pulse stopped. Where? Near Blackwater River. The journey there felt endless. When he finally arrived, the sight shattered him. The wreckage lay twisted beside swollen water. Broken wood protruded from the riverbank. Fragments of Victoria's belongings had washed ashore. A torn piece of her cloak fluttered among reeds. No body had been found. Yet nobody needed to say the obvious. The river had claimed countless lives over the years. The current showed little mercy. Around him, soldiers lowered their heads. Some crossed themselves. Others looked away. Alexander simply stood motionless. The world seemed distant, muted, unreal. A cold certainty settled over everyone present. The Duchess was dead. The kingdom mourned within days. Church bells rang. Black ribbons appeared across the capital. Newspapers announced the tragedy. Thousands grieved the beloved Duchess. Alexander attended none of the ceremonies. He remained locked inside Ashford Palace. Not because he accepted her death. Because he could not. One evening he entered Victoria's abandoned sitting room. Everything remained untouched. A book rested where she had left it. Embroidery lay unfinished beside a window. The scent of her perfume still lingered faintly in the air. The room felt haunted by absence. Then he noticed an envelope inside a drawer. His name appeared on the front. Hands trembling, he opened it. The letter inside was short. Alexander, I heard what you said. Perhaps I should thank you for finally telling the truth. I only wish I had learned it before giving you my whole heart. Do not search for me, Victoria. By the time he finished reading, his vision blurred. The paper slipped from his fingers. For the first time since childhood, Alexander Ashford wept. Not as a duke. Not as a powerful nobleman. As a husband who had destroyed the woman he loved. Meanwhile, far from the kingdom's mourning banners, life refused to end. Victoria awoke to unfamiliar voices. Pain pulsed through her body. The scent of herbs filled the air. A wooden ceiling stretched overhead. Confusion clouded her thoughts. An elderly woman sat beside the bed. When Victoria opened her eyes, relief flooded the stranger's face. You survived. The words barely registered. Fragments slowly returned. The storm. The carriage. The river. The heartbreak. Instinctively Victoria reached for her stomach. Tears immediately filled her eyes when she felt movement. The babies were alive. A sob escaped her lips. Not of grief. Of overwhelming gratitude. The elderly woman gently squeezed her hand. You and your children were blessed. Children. The word echoed inside her. Not Duchess. Not wife. Not Ashford. Only mother. Weeks passed. Victoria remained hidden within a small village far beyond the kingdom's attention. She abandoned her title. Abandoned her family name. Abandoned the life that had broken her. Months later, during a snowy winter night, labor pains finally arrived. The struggle lasted until dawn. When it ended, 2 newborn cries filled the tiny cottage. A boy. A girl. Victoria held them against her chest and felt something inside her begin to heal. Not completely. Perhaps never completely. But enough. She named them Edward and Lily. The names felt like promises. Promises of a future untouched by palace conspiracies, cruel words, and shattered dreams. As dawn painted gold across the snow-covered village, Victoria looked at her sleeping children and made a vow. No matter how difficult life became, she would protect them from the man who had broken her heart. Hundreds of miles away, that same morning, Alexander sat across from Victoria's physician inside Ashford Palace. The old doctor's face looked unusually pale. There is something you must know, Your Grace. Alexander lifted tired eyes. What is it? The physician hesitated. Then spoke the secret he had guarded for months. Her Grace was not carrying one child. The room fell silent. Alexander's breath caught. The physician lowered his gaze. Victoria was carrying twins. For 6 years, 2 lives moved in opposite directions while remaining chained to the same wound. In the quiet town of Willowbrook, Victoria woke each morning before sunrise. She lit the stove, prepared breakfast, mended clothing, then walked hand in hand with her children toward the small village schoolhouse. The life she had built was simple, modest, peaceful. Yet it had been purchased with unimaginable pain. Most villagers knew her only as Victoria Hart, a respected schoolteacher, a kind mother, a woman who smiled often but never spoke about her past. No one knew she had once crossed marble palace floors beneath crystal chandeliers. No one knew she had once worn a crown. And no one knew that some nights she still woke from dreams filled with a familiar voice saying words she could never forget. I regret marrying her. The memory hurt less than it once had. But it never disappeared. Some scars simply learned how to live beside the heart. Edward and Lily became the center of her world. At 6 years old, they filled every corner of the cottage with life. Edward possessed an adventurous spirit that constantly pulled him toward trouble. He climbed trees too high, explored rivers too far, asked questions nobody could answer. Lily balanced him perfectly, thoughtful where he was reckless, patient where he was impulsive. She noticed details others missed and carried a kindness that reminded Victoria painfully of the man she had spent 6 years trying to forget. Sometimes she caught herself staring at her children. Their dark eyes. Their expressions. The way Edward tilted his head when concentrating. The way Lily folded her arms when displeased. Alexander lived inside them. No matter how far she ran, she could never entirely escape him. One spring afternoon, Edward returned from school carrying a bruised cheek. Victoria immediately knelt before him. What happened? The boy hesitated. A boy said, "I don't have a father." Pain flashed across Lily's face. Victoria's heart tightened. Children could be cruel without understanding cruelty. "And what did you say?" she asked softly. Edward lifted his chin. "I said I have a mother. That's enough." For a moment she could not speak. Pride and heartbreak collided inside her. Pulling both children into her arms, she held them tightly. "You will always be enough for each other," she whispered. The twins hugged her back. In that moment Victoria realized she no longer measured her happiness by what she had lost. She measured it by what remained. Far away inside Ashford Palace, happiness had become a stranger. Alexander Ashford no longer resembled the confident duke who had once commanded ballrooms and royal courts. Responsibility remained. Power remained. The title remained. Yet the man beneath him had changed. The portrait of Victoria still hung above his fireplace. Nobody dared move it. Every morning he looked at her painted smile. Every evening he apologized to it. Years had passed. The guilt had not. He attended royal functions, managed estates, met foreign dignitaries, performed every duty expected of him. But the effort felt mechanical, like a man living someone else's life. Marriage proposals arrived constantly. Daughters of noble houses, foreign princesses, wealthy heiresses. Alexander rejected every one, politely, firmly, without hesitation. The kingdom began whispering that the duke was haunted. They were correct. Meanwhile, Lady Celeste Ravenshire continued waiting. At first she believed time would solve everything. Victoria was gone. The palace mourned. Surely Alexander would eventually turn toward her. Instead, each year pushed him further away. His grief became a wall she could not climb. His loyalty to a dead woman became an obsession she could not defeat. Resentment slowly poisoned her. If she could not have Alexander's love, she wanted his title. If she could not become his beloved, she would become his duchess. The ambition grew darker with every passing year. One autumn evening she finally cornered him during a royal gathering. Music echoed softly through a candlelit hall. Guests drifted between conversations. Celeste approached wearing another carefully chosen smile. 6 years is a long time to mourn someone. Alexander barely looked at her. "Then consider yourself fortunate you have never lost the right person." The answer struck harder than any insult. For the first time, Celeste saw something frightening. He was not healing. He was remembering. And memories could become dangerous. Several months later, danger arrived from an unexpected source. An elderly servant requested a private audience. His name was Thomas. He had served the palace for decades. Age bent his shoulders but not his conscience. When he entered Alexander's study, his hands trembled visibly. "You wish to speak with me?" Thomas nodded. "There is something I should have told you years ago." Alexander looked up. The servant swallowed hard. "I heard Lady Celeste speaking with Lord Blackwood before the ball." A chill moved through the room. "What did they discuss?" Thomas lowered his gaze. "The conversation that night." Silence followed. Absolute silence. The servant continued. "They planned it." Alexander stood slowly. "What?" "They arranged the question. They knew exactly how to corner you before the nobles." The room seemed to shrink around him. Every muscle tightened. Every breath became difficult. For 6 years he had blamed himself. Now another possibility emerged. A darker one. Within days an investigation began. Witnesses were questioned. Letters uncovered. Financial records examined. Piece by piece the truth surfaced. Celeste had manipulated the evening from the beginning. She had positioned nobles, encouraged rumors, coordinated conversations. Most devastating of all, she had deliberately guided Victoria toward the doorway where she would overhear Alexander's words. The revelation exploded through the royal court. Nobles who once admired Celeste abandoned her instantly. The king himself presided over the inquiry. Evidence mounted relentlessly. By the end, denial became impossible. Celeste stood before the court stripped of dignity and influence. For the first time in years, Alexander looked directly at her. "Why?" The question carried no affection, No anger. Only exhaustion. Celeste's composure finally cracked. Because she had everything. The answer echoed through the chamber. The king's verdict arrived moments later. Exile. Permanent banishment from the kingdom. As guards escorted her away, Celeste looked back one final time. Alexander never watched her leave. Justice brought no satisfaction. No peace. No closure. Because exposing the truth changed nothing essential. Victoria remained gone. The woman he loved was still beyond reach. Winter arrived soon afterward. Snow covered roads and rooftops across the kingdom. One evening Alexander sat alone beside a fire when a traveling merchant arrived seeking shelter. The man shared stories from distant regions while servants served supper. Most of the tales blurred together. Until one sentence captured Alexander's attention. There is a remarkable schoolteacher in Willowbrook. Alexander looked up. The merchant smiled. Raises twins by herself. Something stirred inside him. Many women do. Perhaps. The merchant shrugged. But those children are unusual. Alexander felt an unfamiliar tension. How so? The traveler laughed softly. The boy and girl look so much alike you would think they were royalty. A strange chill moved through the room. The merchant took another drink. Then added the words that stopped Alexander's heart. And the boy has your eyes, your grace. The journey to Willowbrook took 4 days. 4 days of snow-covered roads, restless nights, and hope so fragile Alexander scarcely dared trust it. The merchant's words echoed endlessly inside his mind. The boy has your eyes. Reason told him not to believe it. Coincidences existed. Resemblances happened. Dreams often disguised themselves as possibilities. Yet something deeper refused to surrender. For 6 years he had searched graveyards, villages, cities, and distant estates. For 6 years every trail had ended in disappointment. This time felt different. By the afternoon of the 4th day, the small town finally appeared beyond rolling hills dusted with winter frost. Willowbrook looked untouched by court politics and royal ambitions. Modest cottages lined quiet streets. Children played near a frozen pond. Smoke curled from chimneys into pale skies. Everything seemed peaceful. Alexander suddenly understood why Victoria might have chosen such a place. No palace walls. No whispers. No schemes. No Celeste. Only life. Only freedom. He dismounted near the town square. Almost immediately he noticed a schoolhouse standing beside a large oak tree. Children's laughter drifted through the crisp air. Something tightened inside his chest. He moved toward the sound. The school door opened. Several children rushed outside. Then she appeared. Time stopped. Victoria stepped into the winter sunlight carrying a stack of books. 6 years had changed her. Yet somehow they had not. The young duchess who once relied upon palace servants and royal protection was gone. In her place stood a woman shaped by hardship and survival. Strength existed in the way she carried herself. Confidence lived in her posture. Wisdom rested quietly behind her eyes. She looked beautiful. Not because she resembled the woman he remembered. Because she had become someone even greater. For several seconds he could only stare. Then Victoria looked up. The books slipped slightly in her hands. Her face drained of color. Neither moved. Neither spoke. The years between them seemed to gather silently in the cold air. Shock came first. Then disbelief. Then something far more painful. Recognition. Alexander took a tentative step forward. Victoria. Her name left his lips like a prayer. She immediately stepped backward. The movement hurt more than any accusation. You should leave. Her voice remained calm. Too calm. As though she had rehearsed those words for years. I searched for you. I know. Alexander froze. You knew. People talk. Even small towns hear stories. Her gaze never softened. Go home, Alexander. I can't. A flicker of emotion crossed her face. Gone instantly. That stopped being my concern 6 years ago. The words struck with quiet precision. Before he could respond, 2 children emerged from behind the schoolhouse. A boy. A girl. The world tilted beneath Alexander's feet. Edward and Lily. He knew instantly. No explanation was necessary. No introduction required. They carried Victoria's grace. Yet they carried Ashford blood just as clearly. Edward possessed the same dark eyes staring back from Alexander's mirrors every morning. Lily carried his smile. His expressions. His mannerisms. It felt like looking at pieces of himself walking freely through the world. The twins slowed as they approached. Curiosity filled their faces. Victoria immediately moved closer to them. Protective. Instinctive. Maternal. Alexander noticed the gesture and hated himself for creating the fear behind it. The boy looked between them. Mother? Victoria forced a small smile. Everything is fine. The answer convinced nobody. Lily studied Alexander carefully. Children noticed truths adults often missed. Something in her expression suggested recognition. Not of identity. Of resemblance. Alexander swallowed hard. The distance separating him from his children felt immeasurable. Eventually Victoria guided them away. Without another word. Without another glance. Leaving Alexander standing alone beneath the oak tree. That night he rented a room above the town inn. Sleep never arrived. The following morning he returned to the schoolhouse. Then the next day. And the day after that. He did not pressure Victoria. Did not demand forgiveness. Did not claim rights he had not earned. Instead he remained. Quietly. Patiently. Helping where he could. When a wagon overturned in the marketplace, Alexander assisted the driver. When heavy snowfall blocked roads, he joined workers clearing paths. Gradually the townspeople accepted his presence. The twins remained cautious. Yet curiosity slowly replaced distance. Edward approached first. The boy discovered Alexander repairing a broken fence outside the school. You know how to do that? Alexander smiled faintly. A duke learns many unexpected skills. Edward frowned. What is a duke? The innocence of the question stunned him. Alexander suddenly realized Victoria had never told them. Never spoken about Ashford. Never mentioned their inheritance. The children knew nothing. Someone with responsibilities, Alexander answered carefully. Edward considered this. Then nodded. I help mother carry firewood. Alexander laughed softly. Then perhaps you're already qualified. The boy grinned. For the first time, a bridge appeared between them. Lily took longer. She observed before trusting. Watched before speaking. One afternoon she found Alexander reading beside the schoolhouse garden. What are you doing here every day? The directness reminded him painfully of Victoria. I'm hoping your mother forgives me someday. Lily sat beside him. What did you do? Alexander stared at the snow-covered fields. The answer felt simple. And impossible. I hurt someone I loved. The girl remained silent for several moments. Then asked quietly, by accident? His throat tightened. Yes. She seemed to think deeply about that. Mother says accidents still matter. They do. Then why should she forgive you? Alexander looked at the child. The wisdom behind her question amazed him. Because I would spend the rest of my life trying to make things right. Lily studied him thoughtfully. For the first time her expression softened. Days became weeks. The twins gradually welcomed him into small corners of their lives. Not as a father. Not yet. As something undefined. Something growing. Victoria watched everything from a distance. Watched Edward laugh during conversations. Watched Lily ask questions she had never asked anyone else. Watched the impossible unfold before her eyes. And despite every effort to resist, she saw another truth. Alexander was not pretending. The man standing beside her children carried genuine regret. One afternoon that realization became impossible to ignore. Edward climbed a frozen tree overlooking the riverbank. A branch snapped unexpectedly. The boy fell. Victoria screamed. Before anyone else could move, Alexander lunged forward. He caught Edward before the child struck the rocks below. The impact threw Alexander hard against the ground. Pain flashed across his face. Yet his first concern remained the boy. Are you hurt? Edward shook his head. Victoria reached them moments later. Fear still trembling through her body. For a brief second her eyes met Alexander's. The old anger remained. The old pain remained. But something new appeared beside them. Gratitude. That evening, after Alexander left, the twins sat quietly beside the fireplace. Victoria read while snow drifted outside. Then Edward suddenly looked up. Mother? Yes. The boy exchanged a glance with Lily. Neither seemed nervous. Neither seemed uncertain. Only curious. Then Edward spoke the words that made Victoria's heart stop. When is father coming back tomorrow? Victoria barely slept after Edward's question. The words lingered beside her throughout the night. When is father coming back tomorrow? Not the Duke. Not Alexander. Father. The title had arrived naturally, spoken without pressure or instruction. Somehow, despite 6 years of absence, despite all the pain and misunderstanding, the twins had begun recognizing something she had spent years trying to deny. They belonged to him. And he belonged to them. The realization frightened her. Not because she doubted Alexander's love for the children, because she feared her own heart might still remember how to love him. The following morning, Alexander arrived at the schoolhouse carrying books Edward had forgotten the previous day. Victoria met him outside before the twins could appear. Snow sparkled beneath pale sunlight. The village remained quiet. For several moments neither spoke. Then Victoria finally broke the silence. "Why did you never stop searching?" The question caught him off guard. Alexander looked at her carefully. "Because I loved you." Victoria looked away. "Many men claim love. I spent 6 years proving it." Pain flickered across her expression. "So did I." The answer struck him deeply. For 6 years they had suffered separately. For 6 years both had paid for a lie neither truly created. Alexander slowly reached into his coat. "I brought something." He handed her a bundle of documents. Victoria frowned. "What are these?" "Everything." She opened the papers. Witness statements. Court records. Signed testimonies. Official findings from the royal inquiry. Evidence proving Celeste's manipulation. Evidence proving the entire trap had been orchestrated. Evidence proving Alexander had never intended to wound her. Victoria's hands trembled. The world seemed strangely quiet as she read. Sentence after sentence dismantled 6 years of certainty. Thomas's testimony. The noble's confessions. The king's judgment. Celeste's own admission. By the time she reached the final page, tears blurred her vision. Not because the pain vanished, because it suddenly changed shape. Alexander had hurt her. That truth remained. But he had not betrayed her. The distinction shattered something inside her. For years she had imagined indifference, cruelty, rejection. Now she was staring at evidence of desperation, fear, sacrifice, love expressed in the worst possible way. Victoria lowered the documents slowly. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Alexander laughed bitterly. "Because I believed you were dead." Silence followed. Heavy, painful, honest. For the first time in years, neither hid behind anger. Both simply stood inside the truth. That evening the twins found Victoria crying quietly beside the fireplace. Lily immediately sat beside her. "Mother?" Victoria pulled both children close. The warmth of their small bodies steadied her. "There is something you deserve to know." Edward straightened instantly. The twins listened as Victoria finally told them everything. The palace, the title, the marriage, the misunderstanding, the storm, their birth, and the identity of their father. Neither child spoke for several moments afterward. Then Edward looked surprised. "Father is a duke?" Lily frowned. "That's your question?" Victoria laughed through tears. The sound felt unfamiliar after so many years. Edward grinned sheepishly. Lily wrapped her arms around her mother. "Are you still angry with him?" The question pierced straight through the center of Victoria's heart. She thought carefully before answering. "No." The twins exchanged hopeful glances. "Then what are you?" Victoria looked toward the window, toward the snow, toward the future waiting somewhere beyond it. Hurt. Several days later, a royal carriage arrived in Willowbrook. A formal invitation followed. The king himself had requested their presence in the capital. Victoria initially refused. Alexander did not argue. He simply accepted her decision. Then Edward and Lily changed everything. "Running away solved nothing the first time," Lily said. Victoria stared at her daughter. Edward nodded. "Maybe it's time to finish the story." Children possessed an extraordinary ability to simplify impossible choices. 1 week later, the Ashford family returned to the capital together. News spread across the kingdom like wildfire. The lost Duchess had returned. The twins existed. The heirs lived. Crowds gathered throughout the city streets. Church bells rang once more. But this time not for mourning, for hope. The grand royal ballroom glittered beneath thousands of candles when they arrived. Victoria froze upon entering. 6 years vanished instantly. She remembered the doorway, the laughter, the words that had shattered her life. Pain stirred inside her chest. Alexander noticed immediately. "I know." His voice remained soft. Victoria looked at him. For the first time she saw the memory hurting him just as deeply. Perhaps more. The royal court filled the hall. Nobles watched from every corner. The king sat upon his elevated chair. Edward and Lily stood proudly beside their mother. Then something unexpected happened. Alexander stepped forward alone. The entire ballroom fell silent. The duke removed the ceremonial chain from around his neck. Gasps spread through the crowd. Next came his signet ring. Then the symbols of his authority. one by one. The king watched carefully. "What are you doing, Ashford?" Alexander never looked away from Victoria. "Making a choice." The room became absolutely still. Alexander turned toward the court. His voice carried across every corner of the ballroom. "For 6 years I have lived with a mistake. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed." He continued. "I failed the woman I loved. I failed my family. I failed the children I never had the chance to know." Emotion thickened his voice. "But I will not fail them again." The king slowly rose. "What are you proposing?" Alexander dropped to one knee. Shock rippled through hundreds of nobles. The most powerful duke in the kingdom knelt publicly before his wife, before the entire court, before everyone. "If Victoria refuses to return to Ashford Palace, I surrender everything." Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. "My title." Silence. "My lands." More silence. "My fortune." The crowd stood frozen. Alexander looked directly at Victoria. Only Victoria. Nothing else existed. Because none of it matters without her. Tears filled her eyes. The room disappeared. The court disappeared. The kingdom disappeared. Only his face remained. Older now. Marked by regret. Changed by loss. Yet unmistakably sincere. Alexander's voice broke. 6 years ago I stood in this room and said the cruelest words of my life. Nobody looked away. Nobody dared. He swallowed hard. Then spoke clearly. Losing her was the greatest regret of my life. The confession shattered the final wall around Victoria's heart. Not because it erased the past. Because it honored it. Because it acknowledged every wound. Every tear. Every lonely night. Every year stolen from them. Edward squeezed Lily's hand. Lily wiped tears from her cheeks. The twins were watching their parents find each other again. Slowly Victoria crossed the ballroom. Each step felt like a chapter closing. A burden lifting. A wound healing. She stopped before him. Alexander remained kneeling. Waiting. Hoping. Terrified. Victoria placed a trembling hand against his cheek. The same cheek she had once touched as a young bride. The same man she had never truly stopped loving. "You hurt me. I know. I almost hated you. I know. I lost 6 years." Tears slipped down Alexander's face. "So did I." Silence stretched between them. Then Victoria smiled through her tears. A small smile. A fragile smile. A beautiful smile. And finally, after 6 years of sorrow, she whispered the words that gave them both back their future. "Come home, Alexander." The ballroom erupted. Applause thundered. Nobles cheered. The king himself smiled. Edward and Lily ran forward and threw their arms around both parents. For the first time in their lives, the family stood together. Oh, united. At peace. Years later, people would remember many things about that night. The return of the lost Duchess. The revelation of the royal twins. The restoration of the Ashford family. But above all, they remembered one extraordinary sight. Not a duke standing proudly above his kingdom. A husband kneeling before the woman he loved. And in the very ballroom where Victoria once heard the words, "I regret marrying her," the kingdom witnessed a far greater truth. Love had finally spoken louder than regret.